Folks, we've got a great one for you tonight. Envirorealism or environmental. It's the theme of tonight's episode, taking a balanced, rational approach to the long-term sustainability of the Great White North and the abundance of resources that hold the promise of long-term prosperity. But alas, unfortunately, the debate has devolved. Some people having no interest in compromise. And that needs to stop. And so it's time to start some Canadian common sense. Look, the debate over man-made global warming is the latest battleground in a much broader conflict over development. The high priest of global warming, the faith of global warming, is Al Gore, and he continues to prognosticate on the man-made end of days. While Canada's chief acolyte, Canadian cultural icon St. David Suzuki, thinks we should completely turn off the oil sands tap. For them, there's no debate, no serious discussion. They aren't interested in a sustainable compromise. Suzuki has called climate skepticism an intergenerational crime, even suggesting jail time for politicians who ignore his interpretation of his set of facts, invented facts. Here's a quote from 2008. "What I would challenge you to do is to put a lot of effort into trying to see whether there's a legal way of throwing our so-called leaders into jail because what they're doing is a criminal act." How do you even begin to negotiate with that? It's hard to even know what the middle ground is. And Suzuki's view has been adopted by the quasi-professional protesters that pop up everywhere. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, they're holding a conference in Toronto, a showcase of Canada, the energy superpower, the opportunities in both jobs and Canadian economic development. I mean, they're truly immense. Yes, there are environmental side effects that have to be considered, but the protesters don't think reasonable regulation is enough, declaring that CAP murders people. Ezra went down there to talk with them along with his producer, Ricky Ratliff, and their presence alone was enough to spark a violent confrontation and plenty of insults. People who view CAP as a mindless killer, here's one of their signs: capitalists assassinating people and the planet. Can we really work with these people? I mean, we'll talk to Ricky about the possibility of a meaningful dialogue later in the program. Look, I do have hope in a meaningful solution when I witness folks like former Greenpeace founder Patrick Moore. I mean, he's made the transition from the blind rhetoric to the rational. We'll be talking to him about what a truly balanced approach is all about, where we can protect our environment for the future without compromising our way of life in the here and now. We'll be hearing from him directly in just a few minutes. So it's time we find some common ground for a rational conversation based on facts, the truth, with the true consideration of the pros and the cons. It's time we all shared some Canadian common sense. Envirorealism, sometimes doing the right thing, involves making some very tough decisions that make the most sense in the long term. And nobody knows this better than former Margaret Thatcher advisor, Lord Christopher Monckton of the Science and Public Policy Institute. Lord Monckton, thank you very much for joining us.
Charles, it's a real pleasure to be with you, as always.
Is the irrational opposition calling petroleum producers murderers, is this really about the environment, or is this just authoritarian ideology with the latest face, the latest mask?
I think that puts it really in a nutshell. It is the fashionable communist ideology. I'm going to call it communist. That's what it really is. They've repackaged themselves as Greens. And indeed, Patrick Moore, who I've always thought of as very much a rational environmentalist, he has said before that when he and my great friend Eric Ellington founded Greenpeace, they wanted it just to be a sensible environmental organization, arguing in a rational way for raising the profile of environmental considerations. And he said within a few years, it was taken over by Marxists. And because people like Patrick Moore, and certainly Eric Ellington, my friend, were not political, they didn't know how to stop the Marxists taking over their organization. And so in the end, Patrick Moore left in despair. So did Eric Ellington and many of the other founders of Greenpeace when it became taken over by the crazies who tend to run it now. So I've always had something of a soft spot for Patrick. I've never had the pleasure to meet him, but he's always sounded to me like somebody who was much more on common ground with us who try to do things by reason than one might otherwise have thought. So yes, it's time to call these wretches to account who are saying that capitalists are killing the planet. No, we're not. It is quite significant that in those countries of the world which are capitalist and free market and therefore prosperous, those are also the countries that have the cleanest environment. If you want a dirty environment, you go to old communist Russia. They're cleaning it up now, of course. You go to present-day communist China. Exactly the kind of regimes that these cranks are arguing for. These are the places who, because they haven't got the wealth to look after their environment, they're the ones that mess it up. There has to be a balance between generating wealth and looking after the environment. If you don't generate wealth, you can't look after the environment.
Lord Monckton, you and I have chatted before, and you know that I always get a bit of a giggle out of Marxists who declare that capitalism is evil because it's greedy. Because when Marxists meet money, and lots of it, they can be awfully greedy, to say the least. And don't we have a nexus here, a meeting point between ideology and dollars? Isn't Greenpeace and the Greenpeace agenda, today's Greenpeace, isn't it extremely profitable?
It's one of the most profitable enterprises on earth because in most countries it doesn't have to pay tax. In one or two countries they've worked out that it's effectively a political party masquerading as an environmental group, and they've taken its tax status away, its charitable status away. But many other countries are rather feeble-minded about this, and what they've got is effectively a political party cheating by avoiding paying its taxes and then criticizing the big corporations for not paying enough tax. So yes, I think these organizations are very profitable. They're making a lot of money. And where does most of this money now come from? It doesn't come quite so often now from the dopes who think they're giving money to the environment when in fact they're giving it to effectively the Communist Party under its new guise. It comes from the huge corporations who now tend to subsidize Greenpeace and other organizations like it, the Environmental Defense Fund, the Worldwide Fund for Nature. These are the big ones with incomes between them that equal those of many medium-sized countries. And this income now largely comes from taxpayers giving grants and subsidies to these organizations when they wouldn't grant subsidize any other political party. It's frankly time we made them open their books in the way in which they demand that we should open ours.
Christopher, do corporations, including energy corporations, do they subsidize a lot of these green organizations, these so-called not-for-profits that are making gobs and gobs of money on green ideology? Do corporations subsidize them, give them large amounts of money because of soft and maybe not so soft extortion, basically give us money or we put you in our ideological crosshairs?
That is very much the blackmail I think that's going on. I mean, ExxonMobil for a time didn't subsidize these people. Instead, it subsidized to a relatively small extent various skeptical groups. Not that I ever saw any of the money, wish I had. But ExxonMobil then, under Rex Tillerson, changed his mind. And he said, no, we're not going to subsidize the skeptics anymore, because even though we think the skeptics are obviously right scientifically and economically, because you make a good point earlier about how economically it doesn't make any sense to do anything about any of this, he then decided that he would try and buy off the Greens. He didn't say that's what he was doing, but effectively ExxonMobil then began subsidizing various greeny groups. I can't remember whether they subsidized Greenpeace or what the figures are, because that's not the focus of my inquiries, which are chiefly into the science and economics of the global warming scam itself. But yes, there is a lot of this going on. A lot of corporations, you see it on advertising. They're all advertising how much greener their houses and their cars and their this and their that products are. It's all a lot of fashionable nonsense. And actually now, increasingly, people are beginning to learn this. I mean, Gore, for instance, has his Generation Investment Management Fund. And now virtually none of that fund is in any green enterprise altogether, because even Al Gore has worked out that even with multi-billion-dollar subsidies to some of the corporations he tried to put his clients' money into, those corporations are going bust or losing money at a fantastically rapid rate, because none of what they do makes any sense economically. And when the subsidies begin to run dry, and that's beginning to happen now, they're all going bust. So this corporate maneuvering in the environmental world, I think, is now beginning to come to an end. If even Al Gore is beginning to pull out of all these green industries and green organizations, you can bet that it won't be too long before the capitalist world wakes up as well as the Marxist world and starts pulling out. And I think in 5 years' time, all of these wind farm companies and solar companies, very nearly all of them, will be gone.
Just one last question, if you can do this for me in less than a minute, Lord Monckton, I'd really appreciate it. How unprofitable,
Sure.
how unprofitable has the world of green been to Mr. Gore?
Oh, he has made a lot of money out of it personally, but his investors are beginning to do not quite so well out of it, because he's pulling them out of green investments now that the subsidies are drying up. He himself has made something like $100 million. I was in Gibraltar recently to try to face him in debate, but as usual, he ducked and dived and ran. So, Al, baby, if you're looking, I'm still chasing after you. You can run, but you can't hide. I'm going to get you. He was paid $200,000 by the tiny population of Gibraltar to make a 45-minute rambling, tired, serially inaccurate speech. I was paid nothing to make the counter speech at a separate venue, but as many people came to mine as went to his, though he had a whole lot of make-weights who were told by the government they had to go. So Gore is now history. Monckton is the coming thing. You heard it here first.
Shaking down the Lilliputians, quite a racket. Lord Monckton, thank you very much for the visit.
Charles, as always, a pleasure.
Lord Christopher Monckton, former advisor to Lady Thatcher in London.